Amazing.
There we go.
Thank you ever so much. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Bristol Fundraising Group. Today we are joined by David Burgess, Director of Apollo Fundraising. As a consultant and trainer, David crafts practical funding solutions for arts, culture, heritage, and higher education organisations across the UK. He's probably not going to want me to point this bit out, but during his career, David has been recognised with several awards, including previously being named as one of the UK's top 25 fundraisers under 35 by Civil Society's Fundraising magazine, and has been recognised by Fundraising magazine as being one of the UK's most influential fundraisers. You can tell us more about that in a minute, David. The title of David's session today is The Four Horsemen of the Grant-pocalypse. With a title like that, I'm going to leave David to explain in more detail. But with funding success rates plummeting left, right, and centre, and feedback getting harder and harder to come by, David is going to help us to understand what's working and what might be holding our proposals back. So I am delighted to hand over to David Burgess.
Great, thank you very much, Sophie. I absolutely am not going to say any more about those awards, mainly because I can already see you trying to work out how long ago that 25 under 35 one must have been. Um, just to say, as you can probably hear, I have lost my voice a little bit. I think I'm going to be okay to get through this. If you're struggling to hear me, please do say in the chat. I'll try and move microphones around. If it goes completely, I'll just deliver the rest through interpretive dance, if that's okay. Let's get into it. So, a couple of years ago, I was set the task of taking a pile of 256 applications and throwing 226 of them in the bin. Well, actually, in the recycling bin, if we're being honest. So for every nine in that pile, I had to get rid of eight. And you will be delighted to know I was successful. If you're looking for the reaction function for the round of applause one or the celebration one, it's no nothing. Tough crowd, tough crowd. Thank you, Abigail. I appreciate that. That means a lot. Pippa, brilliant. Thank you. Um, some of that task was really easy. I reckon getting rid of the first half of those proposals was probably quite easy. It did get a bit tougher. Did get a bit tougher, and find myself sort of trying to weigh up that two proposals alongside each other. But I got there in the end. I was able to turn that pile of 256 into 30 proposals that would go through to the next stage of that process. No, I should say I am not a professional grant maker. My day job, as Sophie said, is as a fundraising consultant. But I've spent a lot of time trying to experience what it's like on the other side of this process. So over the last 10 years or so, a number of times I've set up real grant programs, giving real money away, assessing real proposals to see what it's like. And what I want to do today as we go through is share some of the most common reasons that I've seen that proposals don't make it through to that next stage. Those things that are holding proposals back. And I think, as we've all seen, this is a really competitive environment at the moment for trusts. That 256 down to 30 proposals, that was about average 4 or 5 years ago in terms of success rate. We have all seen people like Steel Charitable Trust saying that for every one grants they're giving away, they're rejecting 49 at the moment, a 2% success rate because of the increase in applications. So I imagine if I were to do that, run a similar grant program now, the numbers would be even more drastic. The other thing this is based on is I've spent a lot of time over the summer researching trustees and grant managers just to understand a bit more about what they're seeing at the moment. And we're going to bring some of that in, and particularly in what they're seeing when it comes to those actual decision-making meetings. But first, just by quick show of hands, who would prefer to be on the grant givers side of this relationship? Who thinks the grass would be greener on the side where you're writing the big checks and giving the money away? Bethany saying yes. Alex, yeah, getting some hands up there, some thumbs up emotion. Who thinks that the side we're currently on the grant seeker side, who thinks that's the place to be? I'm going to take that laughter as speaking for a lot of people. I'm just saying, no, no, get me out of here. Get me on the other side of this. That's where the fun is. Because I think we have this real sort of rose-tinted view of what life on the other side is like. Our job as a grant giver is just to go into the office every morning and just make it rain. We're writing those checks that are putting smiles on people's faces. What can be better than that? You walk in, there's that big stack of gold on the table, and you've just got to get it out the door. The reality, I'm afraid to say, is a bit different. And hopefully, maybe by the end of today, you'll also have a little bit of sympathy for the grant managers and the people on the other side of this equation. So I have dramatically called this session the Four Horsemen of the Grant-pocalypse. And does anyone know in biblical terms what the four horsemen are? Who the four horsemen are? You can pop it in the chat, or if anyone thinks they know and wants to take themselves off mute and people saying I don't know, that's all right. Well, I'm going to tell you. So they are, and let's see if I can remember now. War, famine, conquest, or pestilence. You see it given both names. Conquest, I think, was the original. In more modern terms, seen as pestilence. We can use pestilence today because it's. Thank you. Verity has also gone with pestilence. Brilliant. And death is the fourth one. And we're going to start with famine, which in fundraising terms, so famine in a biblical sense being a lack of resource, a scarcity of something. And when it comes to our proposals, when it comes to the grant making process, the thing that is most scarce is time. So if I were to ask you, if you were to imagine holding in your hand a real grant proposal that you've written for your organization, picture it, feel the weight of it in your hand. How long do you think someone would need to sit with that proposal to get a good sense of your organization and the project you're applying for? Whack your thoughts in the chat. How long do you think that would take? So if you're saying hopefully not too long, now saying 30 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. Any more for any more? 30 minutes, 10 minutes. Yes, often when I ask this question, the average time people would like is about 30 minutes. We think 30 minutes is a good chunk of time. The problem with that is if you imagine that 256 applications, that average for a mid-sized trust a couple of years ago, and probably about half of that now, if I was to give every single proposal in that pile 30 minutes, that is 3 solid weeks of reading if I do nothing else. Yeah, 3 solid weeks just getting through that pile. And obviously, a grant manager's job is much more diverse than that. They've got inquiries coming in from potential new funders. They're responsible just from the administrative side of running a charity, looking after trustees, keeping the website going. It's just a huge amount. And for a lot of grant making bodies, the grant manager isn't a full-time member of staff either. So that 30 minutes really, in practical terms, just isn't feasible. The answer that a lot of people have given there, 5 to 10 minutes, is about right for that first pass through. Without wishing to disappoint you and depress you on how much time you put in on your side of this relationship versus how much time it's getting across. But we really don't have as much time, as much headspace in that grant manager or in that trustee as we would like to get our message across. So we've got to really think about how we use that 5 minutes, how we make it as easy as possible for someone to read that proposal and really understand what it is we're trying to communicate. And that's not just on the grant manager's side. So for trustees, what will often happen, again, the average seems to be that they get their pack of board papers about 2 weeks in advance of the meeting. And while we might have this impression of trustees as being older members of society, often retired, the reality is a lot of trustees for these bodies have other jobs, they've got family commitments, they've got a social life, they might have other board commitments as well. So they're trying to fit in reading those papers around everything else that's going on. One of the trustees I spoke to was saying that I'm having to read this on the tube on the way into work. I'm having to read them while the kettle's boiling. I'm having to read them while I'm cooking dinner, trying to carve out those bits of time in that 2 weeks ahead of the meeting to make sure they've read through and got on top of those proposals. So not only are they short of time, we're also competing for their attention against these other things. The final way that we're really short of time is in the meeting itself. So when I was talking to trustees and grant managers about the structure of their meetings, one of the comments that came up most often was, I think you need to realize how little of our meetings is actually spent on grant making. There is a huge amount of governance stuff that also has to take place in those same meetings. So if you imagine that pile of 30 proposals, again, the average over the trusts I interviewed was between 45 minutes and an hour and a half on the grant making chunk of that. Now, of course, there are some funders who are able to dedicate whole days to that, whole meetings dedicated just to the grant making. But for a lot of the organisations we're going to be applying to, 45 minutes, an average of somewhere between a minute and a half and 3 minutes if they get through all the proposals in that meeting. So when it comes to this relationship, time is really not on our side. So what can we do about this? How can we use this and turn it to our advantage? So I would say when it comes to writing our proposal, some really key things. Keep it short. Ideally, you're trying to keep this to 2 pages. And I know it's really tempting, especially when it's a free form application, to say, hey, we can say whatever we want. And you'll start getting input from the CEO or the marketing director or the project manager say, you've got to tell them this as well. And you end up with something that resembles your Wikipedia page or the entire potted history of your organization. We've got to make sure that we're only saying what we need to say. Yeah, be really clear. What is that key message we have to get across to the grant manager or the trustee to take us to that next stage? And then how can we evidence that? And be really brutal about cutting things out that aren't strengthening those key points. Try and top and tail with your key points. Again, we've talked about that competition. It's also really draining. You imagine having that pile of 256 applications to get through. You're reading through 10 to 12 in any one sitting. It doesn't take very long until the brain starts to wander. So making sure we're hitting them with that summary, those key points. What do we need them to take away at the start and at the end when they're most likely to be engaged and when they're most likely to remember it? One of the things we can do, and it means that our proposals are being treated a little bit like the direct mail packs we might be sending out if we're doing a lot of individual giving or DM work within our charities. So we can learn some of the lessons that our colleagues in individual giving are using. So things like trying to pick out those key points in bold text, using the headings, the structure of that page to try and get those key points across as well. And one of the other really key points on the page is the image caption. So obviously brilliant in terms of accessibility, but it is one of the places our eyes get drawn, particularly if we're reading off a printed copy. So trying to use that not just to describe what's going on in any picture you're including, but trying to link it back to one of the key points in your proposal. It's also a really good way of using that space that we know is going to get a bit more attention, a bit more traction. And then don't rely on attachments or external links. I see quite a lot of proposals who in answer to the question, say, well, we've made a video about this. So if you want to know what our organization does, watch this video. And when you watch the video, think, this is brilliant, this looks amazing. But the reality is in the practical setting of these meetings, very few people are going to be able to rely on those attachments. The proposal itself has to stand on its own 2 feet, unless the funder has specifically asked for that information. Don't try and use that as a way of getting around word counts or just trying to bring it in life in other ways. Because again, the chances are no one's actually going to get a chance to see that. So in terms of keeping it short, as I say, ideally trying to keep it to 2 pages. Now the problem is when I say that, the natural instinct is to say, brilliant, we will reduce the font size to size 6, we will eradicate margins, we will eradicate any space in between, and brilliant, we've now managed to fit it all onto 2 pages. The problem is, as you can probably see from that side, that's just exhausting to read. Like that, it really is quite overwhelming when you're confronted with that page of really dense text. So this isn't about the amount of space. It's not about conserving paper in this instance. This is about trying to simplify the message, getting those key points across. So protect that white space. Feel that breath of fresh air as we move on to a page that we've actually got white space there. This is about cutting things out rather than trying to cram more into a smaller space. As I say, use short sentences and simple language. It's going to feel really simplistic when you're writing this way. But ideally, you're trying to keep it no longer than 10 to 12 words per sentence. And I quite often review proposals where you've got 80, 90 word sentences where you've forgotten what the start of the sentence was by the time you reach the full stop. Again, we're trying to make it easy to get our messages across. If the reader has to keep going back over a sentence just to try and work out what it says, we're just sort of slowing them down, we're making their job harder. And there is this thing I think that it's not that we've been taught, but we get into this mindset, don't we, that to make ourselves sound clever, using 5 words where one would do is a way that we can come across that we know what we're talking about. Just makes it much harder for the grant manager. Use left justified text. Again, it's 7 to 10% quicker to read on average. So our brain uses the jagged edge of that as a navigation point. So again, when people are skim reading, that's a really helpful thing to have. From an accessibility point of view, again, particularly if we're looking at printed papers, ideally you're looking for no smaller than size 14, trying to keep this really readable where we can, and get your proposal in early. So speaking to the grant manager of what was the Abbey Foundation, he said we get 5% of our applications ahead of the deadline, 90% arrive on deadline day, and 5% come in late. So if you know you've got that tidal wave of applications coming in on the last day, you're going to start reading those proposals as they come in. You're going to start getting ahead of the curve. So if I'm in that 5% that's coming in early, or if I'm reviewing that 5%, I've got more time to read through them. I've got less competition. I can give more time and attention to those ones that are getting through the door early on. It's just not possible with that tidal wave that arrives on deadline day. That's when you're really into that rush. There's a lot more competition for attention. Obviously, getting in early also means that if there are any problems with the application or if anything's missing, there's scope for them to be able to come back and say, actually, this doesn't seem to have come through. That's not just me saying that, by the way. I think most of us here will be familiar with who Paul Ramsbottom is, CEO of the Wolfson Foundation. The team have a soft spot for those who get their applications in early. There is another reason. So the grant manager at Abbey Foundation referenced those 5% of applications that come in late. So from one of the last times I did an open grant program, we set a deadline of 5 o'clock, and you can see here what time this application arrived in my inbox. So what did I do to this proposal? What happened to this one that came in at 1 minute after the deadline? Pippa says not eligible. Ali ignored it. Didn't have time to read it. Bin, excluded. I'm not a horrible person. I read it. This impression of me as being some awful monster. I've got a heart. I can be a nice guy when I want to be. I read it. But in the back of my mind was always that idea that I could have rejected it, and I would have had grounds to reject it if I wanted to. That proposal was always going to have to work a hell of a lot harder than anything else in that pile to overcome that initial perception that it could have gone in the bin. Ali saying I'm nicer than others. It's true. It's true. I don't like to brag about it, but it's true. I suspect if you ask the person who sent that proposal, or on the other side of that is someone sitting very smug thinking, oh, phew, 4:57, we got it in just in time. Brilliant. The reality is, with more and more funders moving online, whether that's either email applications or online portals, there is always that danger for something to go wrong, whether that's a delay in emails coming through, whether it's websites crashing. It's all very well thinking, I sent that at 4:57. You have no idea what time it actually got there. And the reality is, you're probably not going to ever be told that was the reason your application was rejected. So you're never going to have that chance to prove, well, I can show I sent it at a different time. Give yourself time, give yourself breathing room for things to go wrong. Try and make sure we're getting in as early as possible, both for the person reading it, but also just to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. So, famine, a scarcity of time when it comes to understanding, reading, engaging with our proposals. Let's talk about war, our second horseman. War, when two opposing views collide. And I think we see this in how we think funders are approaching these decisions. Because I think sometimes there's that sense of trustees, grant managers are sitting there saying, we've got this big pile of cash. How do we give it away? Who's the most needy out there? How do we get rid of this money? The reality is very different. Most grant making bodies are charities. They have their own charitable mission. When they're sitting around the table, it's not about giving the money away. They're viewing this as an investment. How do we best achieve our mission? How does supporting these organizations help us? And often we go in answering the wrong question. We go in saying, how can you as a funder help us as an organization? If we can flip that switch, if we can start framing our proposals, how does supporting us as an organization help you, the funder? We end up tailoring our message so it's much more in line with the kind of questions, the kind of decisions that trustees are making. And it means we're focusing on the really key points. We stop thinking about our need. We start focusing much more on what it is that they're really trying to get out of this investment. And that's what it is for them. These aren't donations. These are investments with a social return that they're looking for. So if we think about the kind of questions that trustees and grant managers are asking themselves when they're reviewing proposals, it is things like, how does this meet our aims? What's the need for this work? How much money do they need and when? What impact is our gift going to have? And does that represent value for money in particular compared to the other things that they're considering? What are the risks? And I can tell you now, trustees are incredibly risk averse. They are very good at spotting risks a mile away when it comes to our proposals. But the overarching question they're asking, why should we support this over the other things in this pile? And why is this right for us? So if I ask you, I mentioned the 256 applications I looked at a couple of years ago. If you had to guess, what percentage of that 256 specifically reference the foundation's aims, do you think? Again, use the chat to share your guess. I'm used to being the most cynical person in the room. This is amazing. 5, 10, 20%. Value going 80%. Sophie and someone else coming in bang on at 50%. Half the applications. So an optimist would say half of them specifically reference your goals. Someone else might look at that and say half didn't bother to try and work out what this fund was set up to do and tailor their message to match. I'm not saying you can't get funding if you don't reference the foundation's aims. But the more someone on the other side of this relationship has to try and pick out and try and interpret how what it is you're asking for aligns with what success looks like for them, you're just putting barriers in the way. You're just opening yourself up to that chance that they don't see it the same way that you do. So by being really clear, we know this is what you care about. We know this is what you're trying to achieve. This is how a grant helps to achieve that. You're just taking that pressure, that mental burden off the person on the other side of this. And it means you're in control of that message as well. You're not leaving it up to chance that they'll interpret your project and how it fits in the same way. So, cheesy metaphor or analogy alert. Ask not what this trust can do for you, but rather what you can do for this trust. So in reality, what can we do about it? We can be picky about who we apply to. Again, I know there's pressure on budgets. I know there's that sense that we need to be getting more and more proposals out the door, particularly if funders that we've always relied on are no longer there for us now. But the reality is, if they're not a good fit, if you can't make that strong case, you're just entering that big pile, the majority of which are going in the recycling bin. It's not going to get you into the chunk of the pile we really need to be there, which is the shortlist going through to the to those final decisions. Make sure you're really clear of what the funder's aims are, of what success looks like for them. Really spend your time digging into that. And I think part of that is also looking where we can to see what they funded in the past and particularly what they haven't funded. So again, one of the conversations at the moment with funders who say, to the outside world, it looks like we've tightened up our guidelines and we've now excluded loads of people from applying. The reality is, we never funded those organizations anyway. All we've done is tightened up what we're saying. And in the face of this competition, they were actively looking to say, where is that gap between the types of organizations that are coming to us and the types of organization we have never supported? So it's not that anything has necessarily changed. They're just now being clearer about, look, please just don't bother. If you're a scout group, for example, as it was for this particular organization, we it's not that we don't like you, but we have never funded anything that looks like you. There's obviously something there that just doesn't align for us. So don't fund. So look at both. Don't just look at what they say. Look at what that actually means in practice. And more funders getting better at listing their grants in their annual accounts. Be really explicit in the proposal about how you meet those aims, but also try and quantify that tangible impact. You're trying to show that what is that return on investment likely to be if they give you that grant. And there is that thing of reflecting a funder's language back to them, again, helping them if they've got that checklist of the things they're looking for. But don't just parrot it. You've got to show that you also know what that means and what that looks like in your context as well. Funders will see if you've just literally copied and pasted without making it relevant or without showing any context for your organization too. Horseman number 3, pestilence, spreading of plague and illness. And in this case, the confusion, the plague of confusion that fills our writing. This is the point where a room full of people who are used to writing to influence start saying, what are you talking about? We're really good communicators. We can get our message across. The reality is, most proposals are gobbledygook. Most proposals are really hard to understand, get a sense of what it is that you're actually trying to say. Um, and I don't think that's a skills problem here. There is a reason for this. I'm going to try and explain what I think that reason is. And to do this, I'm going to test the drawing skills of the Bristol Fundraisers group. So if you've got a piece of paper or something to hand that you can draw on, please can you draw me your best picture of a Geronuk? Okay, Sophie's looking confused. Uh, anyone else? Anyone else not sure what a Geronuk is? Sally, okay. Okay, let me yeah, okay. Let me see if I can describe a Geronuk for you. So a Geronuk is it's 80 to 105 centimeters tall. It weighs between 28 and 52 kilograms. It's got a long, slender neck and limbs. It's got a flat, wedge-like head, big ears, and large round eyes. Back is sort of reddish brown. Sides are sort of fawn to buff color. It's got horns. Horns measure 25 to 44 centimeters, and they sort of curve backwards, then slightly forwards. Is that better? Still not. Um, um, oh, I know. If I told you a geronoc's an antelope with a long neck, is that better? Okay, what is the point of this? Once we know what a geronoc looks like, everything on that list makes sense. We can hang all of that information against that picture that we've got in our head. The problem is, without that existing picture, that list doesn't really help us. It's a list of features, but without anything to hang on, it's not really very concrete. It doesn't really get that message across. And the problem is when we're writing proposals, we have that picture of our organization in our head. We've seen our work day in, day out. We are used to experiencing, we know what it looks like. And the reality is when we're writing about our work, when we're writing about our organization, we end up writing things a bit like this list. And we set out some of the features. And part of the problem with this is that we've long been told we've got to emphasize our USP. We've got to show how our organization is different to everyone else in this space. The problem is if we only start with those differences, we make it really difficult for someone on the other side of this relationship to really understand what it is we're doing. You have possibly heard this reference as being the curse of knowledge. So it's a phenomenon. It became particularly well known by Chip and Dan Heath in their book Made to Stick, a brilliant book. I highly recommend it to anyone writing to try and influence or get their message across. It's absolutely fantastic. But based on research by a professor called Elizabeth Newton at Stanford University, who did a lot of work on this. Um, but the Heath brothers talk about this as being once we know something, we find it really hard to imagine what it was like not to know that thing. And it's this idea that our knowledge has cursed us. And therefore, we can't share that with people who don't have that knowledge because we can't really recreate their state of mind. And what that means is when it comes to proposals, we see things that look a bit like this. Feel free to stop reading at the point you say, I've got no idea. The thing is, this means something to the person that wrote that, and it probably means something to everyone else within that person's organization. The reality is, it just doesn't mean anything to people outside of that. So we've got to imagine that the person reading this knows nothing. The reason that that Jonah description works is because we start with something that we know they understand, and then we emphasize the difference. We're like this, but here's how we're not that thing. So hanging our message or giving something that they can use as a starting point and then building our description from there is going to give a clearer picture. It's going to get our message across in a far better way when we're writing to people outside of our organization. So assume they know nothing. Paint them a picture. I think an exercise that's really useful for this is getting someone who doesn't know either your organization or the project to read the proposal and then describe it back to you. Get them to describe the project and see how accurately their description matches what you were trying to get across. And if they've sort of gone off in a very wildly different direction, or they're not bringing out key things that you think are really important, that's the time to have a go at sort of tweaking and amending the proposal so it's clearer. Look for connections with things your reader will definitely know or might have experienced, and avoid jargon. But again, that's one of those things that's really easy to say, much harder to do because of the very thing we've been talking about. Curse of knowledge often means that we don't recognize what our organization or sector specific jargon is. Now I can see there's a couple of arts and culture fundraisers in the room. So if I say to an arts and culture organization, NPO, most people will jump to, oh, that's an Arts Council England National Portfolio Organisation. And we use that a lot in our. There's a lot of other people who don't not work in the arts saying that's not what an NPO is. Sorry, an NPO is a non-profit organisation. We're often not talking to sector-specific professionals or people with experience of our specific part of the charity world when we're writing applications. So things that we take for granted as being everyday words and phrases just don't travel. So again, that's why getting an outsider to review it can also be really helpful. Just picking out on things where you think, I wasn't completely sure what that meant. Yeah, that didn't mean anything to me. Horseman number 4, death. That's very dramatic. Death in a for, proposal writing sense. Death by boredom sort of follows on quite nicely from proposals being gobbledygook. A lot of them are also really boring to read. I'm sorry. I wish it weren't so. But somewhere along the line, we've got into this habit. Not only that do we have to write in quite an academic way, but that we have to just suck the life out of our proposals. We've got to make this really cold and academic and almost like a piece of sort of university or college coursework. And I think part of it is this sense that perhaps we think we're writing for robots, that we think because this is a body rather than one or two individuals, that it's being fed into a big computer and rational answers are being spat out the other end. The reality is we are still talking to humans, and generally we're talking to humans in an individual setting. Again, I think often we focus on the fact this is going to a group, to a committee, Most of the decisions are made at an individual level. The grant manager is making that first cuts down from 256 to the 30 that might go to the panel. That grant manager has things that they're passionate about, things that inspire them. They are capable of emotional response. The same is true of each of the individual trustees who are reading those proposals and making decisions outside of that meeting before coming in and discussing them with the group. So we've got to try and bring our work to life. And I think that's was it the triangle of influence or whatever it's triangle of interaction. I imagine if you spoke to that person in the pub and got them to talk about your work, I imagine it would be amazing. I imagine their eyes would light up, your eyes would light up. They'd get really excited and about the incredible work that they do and the impact it has. But somehow we lose that. We turn that bit off when it comes to writing proposals, and I think we've got to really bring it back in. Because again, within that pile of 256, everything starts to feel very samey very quickly if everything looks, sounds the same. So we've got to look for those opportunities to stand out from the crowd. We've got to look for those chances to be memorable. So thinking about how we bring our passion into the room, thinking about how we use story as a really powerful way of getting our message across, and again, helping to bring it to life for people that might not necessarily understand the part of the sector we're working in. One of the things I really like to do is use surprise or questions right at the beginning of a proposal, posing a challenge to the reader because it's a really way of catching their attention. So either finding something that they think they know and flipping it on its head, or posing them a challenge that the rest of the proposal will then answer. Because again, brilliant if you're the first proposal they're reading that morning. If you're two or three before lunch, just as the coffee started to wear off, again, you're just having to work harder to get that message across. I would say that's also true in trustee meetings. One of the trustees I spoke to was really upfront about it. And she said, look, this is really tiring, and I'm getting the tireder I get, the harder it is to influence me. So finding these things that keep them engaged, that wake them up when they're trying to read proposals is a really useful thing to have. And look for ways that you can be different. Yeah, if every proposal looks like it's come off the same sort of template, or dare I say, with the increase of people using AI, looks like every other AI generated proposal they might have read, there's a real space for us here to be different. Yeah, AI does average very well. Average doesn't work in this grant funding environment. Being creative in how we get our message across can be much more powerful. And I want to show you one of my favorite examples. Some of you might have heard me talk about this one before. This was written by a fundraiser called Matt Zakiri, who was at Chapter, a mental health charity in Chester when he wrote this. And this is exactly what it looked like on the page. We invited up to 2 pages of free-form text. Most of them looked very similar. Matt's looked like this, set out like a screenplay. So the lady with the long hair, glasses, tank top, that's me, apparently. That represents me. And Matt, who has made himself far better looking than he is in real life, is represented by the chiseled jaw and bearded fellow on the left there. And you can see what he's done is set it out, asking the type of questions that he thinks the grant manager or the trustee might need to know. And it's a wonderful mechanic because it incorporates a lot of the things we've been talking about. You can see how the structure itself keeps that blank space, keeps the white space, structuring it in a way that forces him to provide not informal answers, but quite human, personal answers as we go through. It means he can tier the information he provides so he can get round some of that curse of knowledge. So in that first answer he talks about, we provide people with severe and enduring mental illness. Okay, what does severe and enduring actually mean? Okay, we can dig into that in a bit more detail. Where are those things that might be jargon, might be curse of knowledge? How do we build on that? You can see at the bottom on the left-hand side there, bringing in a case study, a story to help bring that to life, but also where someone else's voice would be more appropriate for talking about their experience. Whole thing really nicely set up. Little bit of humor in it, but incredibly memorable. And I asked Matt in terms of the success rate. He said when he was writing sort of what we would call traditional proposals, he was getting a success rate of about 1 in 6. That was probably about average for the time. This model, he was getting 1 in 2. So really helping to stand out in people's minds. I mentioned the readability of it. So people might have come across the Hemingway app. It's a really useful online resource for checking the reading level of text. And I think you're aiming to get it down to 9. Uh, I ran the shortlist that this was up against through that app. Everything else was scoring 10s, 11s, 12s. Matt's was scoring 6, so really easy to read, and again helped by that mechanic. So that's not saying go away and like completely copy that, but think about what's relevant for your organisation. Anyone think this is a bit gimmicky? Anyone less keen on this? If you sort of that's all right, because as Matt's got you covered on that question too. Final question. Thank you for your time. Just one more question. Isn't this conversational format just a gimmick to make you stand out? Of course, we hope it makes us stand out, but talking is very important to chapter. One-to-one communication is the backbone of our support, so we thought there was no better way to showcase our work than by having a chat. Thanks very much for listening to us. Just absolutely perfect. Love it. Um, that human side of it is being a bit sort of self-aware in terms of how it might be perceived and using it to tie it back to a really key point as well. Um, so there are opportunities there. Again, I know online forms make it harder. It takes away some of our free choice in terms of structure, but give it that thought of, well, if I can't change the structure, what is it I can put in terms of the narrative that's going to bring this to life? But how can I use story? How can I use the framework they've given to get our message across? So 4 horsemen that we've covered, but I'm going to leave you with one other thing. We've talked about all the ways that you can sabotage your own proposal, but we are in an environment where there just is nothing else you can do. Sometimes you can write the best possible proposal and still not get the funding. And I want to give you a couple of examples of that. I mentioned right at the start that when it came to whittling down that 256, getting rid of the first half was really easy. But you do find yourself weighing 2 up, thinking, well, if this one wasn't here, this one would definitely go through. But I think it's this one. And I know, looking back at some of the decisions I've made over the time, if I'd reviewed proposals in a different order, if I'd been in a slightly different mood or frame of mind at that point, there would have been a different outcome. This is massively competitive. I mentioned steel earlier. Only 2% of applications being funded at the moment. You can you can do everything in your power. You can put all of this in place, and there will still be other things there. And I would say the majority of this decision making is not in our control. There is so much going on around us that we have no influence on that decides whether we get a grant or not. Um, one example of this, the charity Full Fact, really brilliant charity doing fact checking of media and politicians in real time. One of the times I've run this grant giving experiment was as part of the Fundraising Everywhere conference in 2021. We shortlisted 10 proposals. We let fundraisers come in and they could decide which 2 out of those 10 proposals they were going to fund. Ran it 10 times over the space of 2 weeks. They all looked at the same proposals, the same grant criteria, and Full Fact was one of the ones in the mix. And for the first half of this, people had liked their work. They were really on board with what they were doing, but they were quite low down when it came to need. People thought there were other more deserving organisations in there, so they hadn't received a grant or hadn't been in the top 2 for any of those first 4 or 5 sessions. Right at the end of that week was the American presidential election where Trump loses, and immediately we start getting that narrative about stolen election, electoral fraud. When we came back into the next run of grant meetings the following week, all of a sudden Full Fact jumped to the top of that pile. The proposal hadn't changed, the guidelines hadn't changed, but that external context, the external environment in which those decisions were being made meant all of a sudden this took on a new relevance and it just landed in a completely different way. And we can't control any of that. And we've seen it a lot in a sort of experiment I've been running over the last couple of months. Because at the moment, I've been talking about sort of my experience of reviewing proposals. Wouldn't it be more fun to do it yourself? Maybe. I'm going to take that as an enthusiastic response. So from September last year, I've started running workshops where you can see an entire grant meeting from start to finish from the perspective of a trustee. So you will review 30 funding proposals. You will see the environment in which these decisions are made through your own eyes. You will actively participate in that. You will get the pack of board papers 2 weeks in advance and have to try and fit that in. You'll see every stage of this decision making for yourself. One of the things I will say, we've run it 4 times so far. None of those groups have come up with the same results, same outcomes as each other. No charity has scored a grant from every single group, which I think hopefully reiterates that point. There's so much of this that we don't control. And if you are interested in that, I am delighted to say I'm bringing this to Bristol in the new year. It's going to be the first time we've done this in person. So Tuesday, the 24th of February, we will sit around a very real boardroom and make these decisions. So if you are interested in that, or if you're interested in future dates, if you go to the website that's on the screen there, you can sign up for newsletter and information about other dates. So we've got in person in Bristol in February, in person in London in March, and then 2 virtual sessions in January and March already announced. There will be more dates through next year as well. And if you sign up at the link there, I'll also send you a free funder relationship tracker that I developed for our clients last year. So if you don't have a CRM system or don't have a nifty way of keeping track of your relationship with grant funders, I put together something there which will hopefully help. And at that point, with 10 minutes left, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit and see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, David. That is amazing. I just wanted to highlight a comment that Holly has made in the chat, because I certainly feel the same. If anyone else feeling really inspired and kind of wanting to completely relook at their case for support. Such a brilliant session. We're opening up for questions. I just wanted to quickly add, I first heard David speak, I want to say it's about 10 years ago, very early on in my fundraising career. And David was inviting people to send in examples of their funding applications. And he was incredibly polite, which I now realise the majority of that application was definitely gobbledygook, but he came back with some brilliant suggestions. And I think today's session has really highlighted how many little changes we can all make to make our funding proposals more successful. And I just will add one thing. There is only 7 spaces left because I'm having one of those on that course in February. So would anybody like to ask David a question? If you want to stick your hand up or add it to the chat. Okay, well, I'm going to get going first of all, if there's no questions yet. David, what do you think about trusts closing early? And I've certainly seen a little bit more of organisations saying, oh, we've kept your application over to the next kind of round. Do you have any, how do you feel about that? Do you have any anecdotal evidence of that happening more, or is it just, are we getting fobbed off?
No, I mean, it definitely is happening more. I have sympathy for the reason. I don't like the reaction or the way they're trying to solve that reason, particularly when it comes to closing early. So, sorry, excuse me. And I kind of stop plugging Think Like a Funder, but it is one of the reasons of setting that up. One of the benefits of that, of seeing it from the other perspective, is quite a few times people have said, okay, now I'm starting to understand some of these decisions people are making. So we've talked about Steel Charitable Trust quite a bit, seeing that massive increase in applications. And we're seeing that across the board. Pretty much every funder has seen the number of applications they receive per year, anything between double, I think probably up to some cases of seeing 10 times the number of applications they would have in a normal year. And we were also seeing that as I say, for organizations who only have one member of staff to deal with that. So you're sort of then in a tricky position, aren't you? If you're getting a year's worth of applications in 1 month, either you've got to spend some of that grant giving resource to increase the staff capacity to review that, which you could say, well, that's probably a small hit to take, but you are then still seeing your success rate absolutely plummet. So still getting to that point and saying, if only 2% of people applying here are being successful, something's not right. And as fundraisers, we often call this out, don't we? We talk about the just the huge value, the amount of time and money that gets spent on applications that will ultimately be unsuccessful. So they're trying to find different ways of reacting to that. Now, one of the things of only doing one open round a year, for example, means that you're just then bringing that back down. You're saying, okay, we're not going to receive the same number of applications. We can spread those applications over a year, so we don't need to increase the resource. We don't need to increase the amount of staff capacity taken to do that, and we don't need to have that same impact on our success rate. It is probably one of the responses or one of the ways around that has more advantages than disadvantages. I'm not a fan of where people say, right, this is going to be the closing date, and actually we're going to close it earlier because of that. Because that, I mean, that from an equity point of view, that's just really not great. It disadvantages generally anyone with caring responsibilities, whether that's for young people or people with illnesses. It disadvantages smaller organisations who might not have time, who are trying to build that their work plan around when those deadlines are. I'm also not a massive fan of the ones that say we'll close after we've had 150 applications. Because I think if your job as a funder is to make that investment and to make the right decision, again prioritizes people who can put something in quickly versus the time it takes to put together a really strong proposal. Is my opinion. But I can understand the context in which they're having to make that decision and having to find a way around that. Um, Question in chat, given how subjective the whole process of approval decline clearly is and the weight of responsibility that probably weighs on trustees, do I see AI being introduced into the sifting process? Yeah, it has already with some. So the Martin Lewis Foundation was one of the first to start trialing AI during COVID for their COVID grants. It was quite a basic approach. It was mainly a sort of keyword sift. So it was looking to say, do they reference our key aims and objectives? Do these words come up? But there are more and more programs being developed for this. I was at Blackboard's conference on Monday. They've got a whole suite of tools for grant makers that includes AI tools, not just for sifting proposals, but also looking at evaluations and what are the learnings from that, using it for due diligence. So I think we will see more use of that. I think I I think there will still be that human engagement for now. There is a sort of dystopian view of grant fundraising that in 10 years this could just be AI proposal writers on the charity side applying to AI assessors on the other, and we take humans completely out of the process. But I think certainly for the foreseeable future, even if they're using it to summarize or to start making some of those initial assessments, I think there will still be that human element within it. Valerie, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for the session. And I was wondering, you talked a lot about making your application with the trust aims, and how would you do that when you're applying to family trusts who don't have a website and they don't have a lot of information on their annual account?
So I think there's a really interesting thing with family trusts and individual sort of philanthropist trust, because yeah, I think for us as fundraisers, we often put trusts and foundations into one big bucket and treat them all the same. And we sort of divide it up, don't we? So individual givers, corporate donors, trusts and foundations, and never the three shall meet. For a lot of people, a trust is just a tax efficient way of giving money away. So there are a lot of funds out there that give money to the same organizations over and over again. And often in terms of philanthropists and families, actually it is just a vision for their individual philanthropy. And I think a key part there is often just looking to see actually when we look at the accounts, if they are listing those, is it the same organizations or very similar organizations getting money each year? Do we need to start treating them more like a major donor and try and build that individual relationship? Or are they actually open to proposals? So I think if there's a email address or a phone number, I think the first port of call is just saying, do you actually want applications for it? Like, can we apply, or are you being much more proactive? And that move to a more proactive approach is definitely another area where we're seeing that growth already for a wide range of reasons, but the number of applications being one of them.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much, David. It is now 12 o'clock, and I appreciate that lots of people are going to be dashing off to their next meetings and things. I want to thank you again for attending and sharing so much information. I know it's been a fantastic session. There are so many comments. The comment I would just like to highlight is Donna saying that's the best presentation that they've seen all year. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
For everybody else, please join our LinkedIn group if you haven't already, because we do keep it updated with sessions that previous speakers are holding. You can also fill in the form, the quick feedback form, to tell us what you think about today's session, and we will, of course, share feedback back with David. We are taking a break in December. We don't have a session next month, and we will share more information soon about our January session, which is very likely to be in-person session, but we will share as soon as we have that. So thank you ever so much. Have a wonderful days, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.